Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
Welcome back, everyone, to GenX Classic Sports. I'm your host, Sean Enos, and today we're going to talk about something that happened in the late 80s through the mid-90s, and we're going to kind of focus in on one of these from 1992. But overall, we're talking about the Foot Locker Slamfest competition that kind of really overtook the sports culture there for a few years. If you don't believe me, wait till you hear about some of these names that participated in this, and then you'll understand, if you're not familiar with it, why it was such a big deal. The Foot Locker Slamfest was a televised slam dunk contest from around 88 to 96, and it stood apart from typical basketball events because it featured pro athletes from other sports competing in a basketball dunk contest. And this whole show was designed as like ESPN and NBC both televised a special, and it was part of a showcase promotional event for Foot Locker and really a celebration of sneaker culture, which was really taking over the sports scene right about then. So like I said, instead of NBA stars, this format brought elite athletes from Major League Baseball, NFL, track and field, and other sports together so they could show off their jumping ability and their creativity and how they could handle a basketball. And like I said, it ran, I think, from 1988 to 1996. But we're going to talk about it in general terms, but we're also going to talk specifically about the 1992 event, because it's one of the most memorable, if not the most memorable. And that's the one that I know for sure I was sitting and watching the day that it happened. Now, to talk about the Foot Locker Slamfest, you kind of have to talk about where the NBA basketball world was at this time. In the late 80s, the NBA Slam Dunk Contest really became resurrected and became a must-see part of NBA All-Star Weekend. Guys like Dominique Wilkins and Spud Webb and Michael Jordan in the mid-'80s into the late 80s completely revitalized that event and to massive TV audiences and interest from NBA fans, basketball fans, sports fans. And if you don't know if you're struggling to remember, Spud Webb won it in 86. I think Dominique won it in 85. Dominique won it a couple of times, and Jordan won it in 87 and 88. And there's that famous picture of Jordan jumping from the free throw line and all this. And so those guys really brought this up to the point of it being a marquee event. Well, Foot Locker's CEO, Howard Sells, he saw an opportunity to sell more shoes, basically. Enter the Foot Locker Slamfest, an annual televised event that took the slam dunk contest from the NBA, turned it up to 11, and it dared some of the most explosive athletes in sports to do something, at least for them, a little bit unusual: slam dunk a basketball in competition. Foot Locker, which was at the intersection of sneaker culture and the sports world, created this event, of course, as a way to sell more sneakers and, in their statement, blur the boundaries between athletic worlds. So to really understand the Foot Locker Slamfest, we have to rewind even further, really, not just to the 92 event, but back to the late 80s when all of this was kind of colliding at once, because this event certainly didn't happen by accident. Remember the 80s, this was when Jordan, Bird, Magic, and other NBA stars all had shoe deals. If you'll remember, Isaiah Thomas, Magic, and Bird all were Converse guys. Jordan, of course, was the Nike guy. We Gen Xers watched, and we wanted to wear the same exact shoes that these guys played in, for sure. By the late 80s and 90s, sneakers weren't just equipment. They were status symbols. Brands were battling like crazy for cultural relevance, and athletes were becoming walking billboards for their brands. At the center of all that, of course, was Foot Locker, which was a leading retailer, in American commerce at the time. Foot Locker stores, you know this, they were everywhere. Malls, the city center, suburban America, the outdoor strip malls, and their target audience was clearly young sports fans who didn't watch just the athletes. They wanted to be the athletes, and they watched what kind of shoes they were wearing as well. And anytime you talk about something like this, you kind of have to throw in the role that ESPN or some other sports network might have, what role they might have played. So Enter TV, like most of the things we talk about on here, this is when ESPN was transforming sports television. But if you'll also remember way back in the day, ESPN didn't own rights to the big three leagues yet so fast, okay? So they were they needed content. Even into the 80s, the ESPN needed content. They needed events, things they could build, a day around or whatever. So things you would stop if you happened to go through there while you were channel surfing. And this was something that to them felt fresh and loud and unpredictable. And someone had a genius idea, of course, to take elite athletes from all kinds of sports and let them dunk a basketball and get scored for it and do it in a competition. And so just like that, Foot Locker Slamfest was born. The format was pretty simple. Show 16 athletes in one competition, all from different sports, compete as slam dunkers. NFL players, they were used to jumping all the time on the field, over defenders, over receivers, especially wide receivers and defensive backs. Major League Baseball stars, of course, some of them were very good at their quick twitch explosiveness on their base running. Your shortstops and your outfielders, great athletes. Track and field athletes who literally trained every day to increase their leaping ability depending on what sport they were in, at a minimum their speed. So why not put them all on a basketball court and see what happens, and then throw in the occasional volleyball player or whatever? It wasn't about just crowning the best dunker in the world. It was really about curiosity. I know it was for me, about answering that playground argument of whether some athlete in some other sport could do things like this. That's the kind of stuff, kids sit around and argue. And so that had been going on not just in Gen X, but forever. So to make sure that it didn't feel like a gimmick, Foot Locker and ESPN combined to treat it like a real competition. I mean, they took it seriously. They brought in serious commentary. And I'll mention it again later, but Dick Vitale was one of them who commentated on the broadcast, and his enthusiasm always made everything seem more fun. They used real brackets, real judges, real pressure, and this was something that they hoped sports fans would come to take as must-see TV. Now, in this day and age, it's hard to imagine this happening because there's so much money at stake for the teams that pay these athletes these incredible salaries. It wasn't there quite yet in the 80s. This was something that you wonder, why would the athletes actually do this? Well, it was great exposure. National television, crossover fans, and of course fans buy posters and fans buy jerseys and fans buy shoes. So it was in the days before the internet, a national TV audience on NBC or ESPN, either one, was a huge, huge promotion to try to get sell your stuff. Fun for, there was nothing at stake here other than, I guess there could have been a freak injury or whatever, but that wasn't considered so much as, you're competing one-on-one against other guys because ego played a part in this. Let's be honest, athletes love proving they're the best athlete at just about anything. And so this appealed to their ego for sure. And anytime we talk about something like this, I always try to throw out there what money might be involved. And, that they weren't doing this for the money. In some eras, this would have been considered great money. Back then, for most of these guys, I doubt it was. Although, I will say, this prize money was probably pretty good for a professional volleyball player or a track and field athlete compared to Major League Baseball and NFL guys. I think they were probably last on that list of earners. So the money was okay for some of them. It just wasn't the main draw for the guys already making good money. The winner of this got $50,000. The second place participant got $25,000, and third place got $15,000. And of course, all their expenses were paid to go, stay, and participate in this wherever it was. So the money was okay, but for stars like Deion Sanders and Ken Griffey Jr. and Barry Bonds and all these guys, this was really a chance to show off their pure athleticism. Their ability to do other things than what we knew them for. Now, here's the key thing, dear Gen Xers. This event could only exist really in that moment in time. Before social media, before branding became hyper controlled by agents and, those folks, before athletes worried about viral failures online, it was more loose and experimental, a little bit chaotic. And I think that's why it worked. Now, I researched this other thing a lot, and I meant to include it in here, but this is going to be a long enough episode as it is, so I can cover this in a later episode. But remember that a precursor to this was something called the Battle of the Network Stars. And if you're my age, you might remember when the three major networks, which were CBS, NBC, and ABC, would take their network stars, meaning the actors in their favorite network shows, and they would compete in an Olympic-style competition. So you might have Mr. Cotter out there running, the 400 against, one of the Richie Cunningham or somebody. So that was a big event in the 70s, and this is kind of a next generation event akin to that. So, yes, I think Battle of the Network Stars was most definitely a precursor to this. And so knowing all of that, by 1992, Foot Locker Slamfest had found its sweet spot. It had been running for enough years by then that it found the perfect mix that year of star power, spectacle, and surprise. And that's the year that I watched it. I sat down and watched this thing live. It wasn't live, I'm sure it was taped, but I watched it the minute that it aired for the first time ever. And that brings us to the lineup for this thing and why this was possibly such a big deal. We're talking about the A-listers of the A-listers in this event. And that's why I don't think you will ever see this in again, because teams that pay these level stars the kind of money they do now would probably not even allow it. Okay. So let's take a look at this. We'll get to that. We'll get to the full list of who was in it in just a second. First, let me tell you a little bit more about how it was organized. So it was a bracket-style tournament, of course, one-on-one dunkers, 16 competitors. Participants had 2 dunk attempts in a round, and that best dunk counted, and then they moved on. They used a standard 10-foot rim, but I did read, and I did not know this at the time. I don't think they announced it, but I found an article that said they typically used a women's basketball, which has a little bit smaller, to help the guys palm and control the ball and just sort of make it a little more, a little easier for them to get the ball down so that it wouldn't lead to a lot of misses. Nobody wants to watch a bunch of misses. So they went ahead and went to a smaller ball so that would help their chances. And from one of the videos that I saw, they used a liberal amount of sticky spray for the competitors. And I already told you it was hosted by professional commentators, so we'll get to that lineup in a minute. So if you'll remember, there was something besides Battle of the Network Stars. There was something even later called the MTV Rock and Jock Weekend, which is where rock stars and sports professionals played. I think they played softball, and I think they played basketball too. I don't remember. I remember softball. So this is that kind of nostalgia. This is that 70s, 80s, 90s made for TV type event competition that we're talking about. So Network Stars, Slamfest, Rock and Jock, all the same kind of stuff. And, it's pretty nostalgic to see the way they did the graphics and all the music and stuff behind it. Cause I just watched the 92 one again on YouTube, and I'll try to put a link up for that. So if you watch the opening video, the introduction to the 92 competition, you'll see what I mean. So speaking of 1992, who competed? Well, if you'll remember, there was a baseball player named Delano DeShields, okay? And Delano won it twice, and he was the returning champion from 91 this particular season. Now, let's talk about all the names. And like I said, these are true A-listers that participated in this. And this group's an insane group. It just really is. Seth Joyner was a well-known NFL linebacker for, I believe, the Eagles at the time. Barry Bonds, the all-time home run leader, Barry Bonds himself, was in it. Now, this was 92, so he did not have the lead in all-time home runs yet. Ken Griffey Jr., the kid, my favorite non-pitcher baseball player of my growing up days, because we're basically the same age. Everybody knows he was a high flyer out there in center field and could also hit home runs over 600, I believe, in his career. Hall of Famer. Deion Sanders, yep, primetime himself, the two-sport star himself, future NFL Hall of Famer. He was in this. Michael Irvin, Cowboys wide receiver. He was a three-time Super Bowl champion and Hall of Famer eventually. Chris Carter, one of the NFL's best pass catchers of that era. I believe he ended up in the Hall of Fame. Tim Brown, Heisman Trophy winner, and I believe he's in the Hall of Fame, right? And then there was Adam Johnson, who was a really tall-looking dude. He was a pro volleyball player. Devin White was a major league outfielder. Some of you will remember that name. Eric Hansen was a major league pitcher. I've already mentioned Delano DeShields, the returning champion. And I believe Delano was a second baseman, right? I know he was a heck of a base stealer. Rob Moore. Some of you will remember Rob Moore from the Jets and I think the Cardinals as an NFL wide receiver. Derek Thomas. That one surprised me. I didn't know Derek Thomas was in there. He's a big dude to be slamming the ball. Obviously, the late NFL linebacker from the Chiefs. Steve Bono, NFL quarterback for the 49ers. Maybe the Chiefs, but the 49ers for sure. Also, Mike Powell, the world record holder in the long jump. And was at the time, he was an Olympic silver medalist. He had already won, he's 6'2". He had already won the slam dunk contest once. And that leads me, some of you who are new to the show and never heard me say this, because I'm based out of Arkansas, in case you can't tell by the accent. And I've joked on here a bunch of times about how anytime there's Super Bowls and NBA titles and all these crazy things in the sports world, it seems like there's always one road that rolls through Arkansas to make that event happen. And in this, Mike Conley Sr., who was a Olympic gold medalist in the triple jump and also a track star at the University of Arkansas, and he was listed at 6'1". Now, I didn't get everybody's height, but I think we all know Bonds was over 6 feet. Ken Griffey Jr. was probably 6'1". Deion 6'1" or 6'2". Michael Irvin's around 6'2". Chris Carter was probably over 6 feet easily. Tim Brown over 6 feet. The volleyball player guy, I think he was over 6 feet. I don't know if anybody on here was under 6 feet. Okay, so just so you know. So imagine a baseball legend trying to windmill dunk from the baseline, or a Cowboys Super Bowl winner going up against an Olympic long jumper, in a dunk contest. So that's the kind of craziness we're talking about, and that's exactly why we loved this thing back then. So focusing in on 1992, that was the lineup, and the event itself was held at Arizona State University in Tempe with 13,000 people in the crowd and an ESPN audience watching. And the commentators were Jim Valvano and Dick Vitale. And with the call was Roger Twibel, and you've probably heard of all those guys. So let's talk about how this unfolded without me giving you a dunk-by-dunk recap, okay? You know the format. They go head-to-head. They get a couple of different dunks. The highest total score moves on to the next round. What ended up happening was the two track stars, both had already won the event, but I don't know if they'd ever competed against each other or not in the finals. But Mike Conley and Mike Powell both made it to the finals. And of course, both of them are track and field stars. They eliminated some interesting people along the way. So Mike Conley Sr., by the way, his son, Mike Conley Jr., longtime NBA veteran. Mike Conley Sr. had the most talked about performance of the night by far, okay? You talk about creativity and athleticism from everybody on the floor that night. Well, the track stars really stood out. And I mean, Deion's out there dunking in a bucket hat, and Michael Irvin's out there throwing down. You got all these A-listers, but Conley stole the show, okay? Conley had already won twice, but not against this lineup, okay? He won in 88 and he won in 89. And on this 1992 event, he beat Derek Thomas, he beat Rob Moore, and he beat Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin was a pretty good dunker, and he beat all of them to advance to the finals against Mike Powell. And of course, the thing that happened ultimately is what everybody talked about. So let me tell you what Conley did. All right, so he was a triple jumper and a gold medalist at that. And so in the early rounds, you could tell the guy knew what he was doing. I was impressed very early on by him. But then he saved the best for last in the finals. He did a free throw line dunk. And I just realized rewatching it that he said after the contest that he dunked it with his non-dominant hand, meaning in his case, his left hand. And so if you'll remember, Michael Jordan had done that in 88 in the slam dunk competition. Julius Erving had done that years before. And I guess the first NBA slam dunk competition, both of them jumping from the free throw line, which is 15 feet from the rim or from the backboard, by the way. But Mike Conley did it with his left hand, which is pretty interesting, okay? So Conley soaring from 15 feet out and throwing it down with his left hand is the iconic memory of the event. And it's what people still talk about and share because it's such a pure athletic explosion type event there. And then Powell tried to match him by jumping from the free throw line, but he didn't even get close. So that dunk sealed it. And Conley finished as the 92 Slamfest champion. And Conley says to this day, people know him from winning the Slamfest above and beyond knowing him as an Olympian, which is pretty funny. So I rewatched it. There were a lot of great dunks, a lot of baseline activity. Conley especially had such hang time. He could do one thing on one side of the rim, go all the way across under the rim and come back on the other side and do things like that. And that's what made his creativity look so cool. But they were all pretty, Ken Griffey Jr., all these guys were pretty good. But, Conley and Powell between them had won it 3 times. So they knew what they were doing and they both trained to be jumpers. So, I mean, hey, it totally makes sense. But don't make any mistake about it. The other guys, they looked pretty good too. They knew what they were doing. What makes this interesting is those A-list other guys didn't really, make the finals. No Deion, no Barry Bonds. Irvin got put out. So this wasn't about, celebrity and that kind. You still had to get it done with your athleticism. So what I'm saying is, in a room full of A-level athleticism, like Super Bowl champion, Major League Baseball champion, and Olympic champion athleticism, still 2 guys kind of stood out above and beyond all of them, which is really interesting. So pure athleticism, leaping ability, hang time, fearlessness, creativity, all that kind of stuff. And so what's cool about it is you have guys who typically ran routes and stole bases and jumped up for blocks, suddenly found themselves judged on their style, creativity, and so forth. Another appealing thing about this is that those big names didn't win a lot of times. I think that kept it interesting. I mean, more interesting than going into it knowing that Deion would win. So with these headliner type guys not making the finals sometimes, it kept it more interesting for people in the crowd and people watching at home. Matter of fact, 2 Major League Baseball players won it, and one of them was only 6 feet tall, and that was Kenny Lofton. He was listed at 6 feet tall during his playing career. Delano DeShields was listed at 6'1" throughout his playing career, but there's a caveat to both of these guys, I got to tell you, because Delano DeShields almost signed with Villanova to play for Raleigh Massimino out of high school, so he knew what he was doing. And Kenny Lofton was a backup point guard for Arizona when the Wildcats went to the 1988 Final Four. So he knew what he was doing too. I just wanted to point out that some of these guys won, but they also had basketball experience. So, just so you know. Now, what's some of the impact of this and what's the nostalgia factor here? As I've said, it was a unique crossover event with athletes from different sports, showing off on one sport together. And that's unusual. It was unusual back then, and it helped bridge fan bases back before social media. So, you may not have been a huge baseball fan, and then you see what Delano DeShields is throwing down out there, and you're like, oh, I got to watch this guy actually play the sport that he's best at. So think about that. The television, of course, I've already told you, ESPN and NBC teamed up to air this, and that brought national attention to this sneaker culture and intersport events like this. And I just saw this yesterday on eBay, and I'm glad it ended up in my notes because there's collectible trading cards from this contest. Foot Locker promoted sets of cards, ball cards, featuring these participants. And that adds to their early 90s nostalgia and memorabilia market. And I was just browsing through eBay, looking at ball cards yesterday, and I saw one of I think it was Ken Griffey Jr.'s or somebody's from this competition. I thought, man, they actually made cards for that. That's really cool. So today, thank you, YouTube. There's classic clips and fan recollections and clips and things of these events that are out there, luckily, and it gives renewed interest to these things through online, throwbacks. And so Gen Xers like me, who wondered for years if this thing was available anywhere, finally found it. And so we remember where we were when we watched it the first time. The harder something is to find, the more valuable it is. And I wonder if at the time, because I never saw them, did they put out a DVD or Blu-ray eventually set of these events? I don't remember it if they did. But anyway, now let's talk about some of the notable participants in this thing leading up to this 1992 event, because they were getting bigger and bigger stars as they went. Now, these are names that I found. And once again, I'm limited to what I can find out on the internet. So here's just some of the names I found. And if some of them are false, I could not find yay or nay on some of the. Herschel Walker, Darryl Green from the NFL, who was a speed demon on the football field. Rod Woodson, one of the NFL's best defenders ever. Major League Baseball, Darryl Strawberry, who was in some of the earliest ones. And Strawberry was tall. Wasn't he more like 6'4" or something? Very charismatic dude. And that made him a natural headliner when this thing was growing. One of my favorite baseball players, Eric Davis from the Cincinnati Reds. He's often cited as one of the best pure athletes of his era in baseball. And the guy was that real wiry combination of speed and power. And apparently he was really good in the Slamfest early days. And I don't even know if we have, even on YouTube, footage of the early days. I was focusing on 92 when I did this. Willie Wilson, everybody remembers him as a speed demon athlete as well from baseball. Track and field, Willie Banks, a world-class leaper. And that he kind of made it okay for track athletes to get involved. This says Carl Lewis did not compete, but he did demos and appearances, and I had no idea about that, and I don't know if that's true or not. But it said he was involved early on and was at least attending. Okay, all right. So let's look at the TV situation, because these big events have to be televised in order to make sort of an impression. So at first it kind of hopped around in the 80s and didn't have a home. It was mostly regional sports network, cable sports specials, and limited national play at all. So in the early days, it was treated more like an exhibition, which it was, and not so much a marquee event. So it aired, on these, way I pictured, these one-off specials on some weird cable channel at midnight or whatever. So it was something that they didn't hype a whole lot. And early on, they really wanted to test the concept, like, will people care about this at all? And so they worked on the format, they worked on the list of participants, and they finally got it to where that ESPN growth happened around 1990. ESPN was what set them over the top, because ESPN was expanding so aggressively, and it needed, event-style programming and highlights that replayed on SportsCenter and content that was outside of the traditional sports. So ESPN gave it a national broadcast, prime weekend and evening slots, heavy replay on SportsCenter, heavy promotion on the channel, and made it a must-watch entertainment event. So because of that, Slamfest gained legitimacy and it built anticipation from year to year and started feeling kind of like a yearly thing you had to watch. And that's what I remember. I remember seeing promos thinking, I've got to watch Michael Irvin, Deion Sanders, and these guys in these dunking contests. I'm pretty sure that I didn't name him anywhere in here, but I think Bo Jackson participated in it as well. Did I mention him? Don't think I did, but I think Bo Jackson was in it. Okay, so you know who was in it. You know what the format was, and you know what years it ran. So what's the big deal about it? Well, it was such a cool GenX moment. There's no YouTube, no social media, no instant replay, no on-demand, TiVo, none of that stuff. So if you missed this, you had to catch the highlights, or you had to hear about it from a buddy, or you had to catch a replay on SportsCenter if they even had it in the early days. So that scarcity made it kind of larger than life to us. And like all good things, this lost momentum as well. So after 92, which was the peak of this, that's why I talked about it. Not only did I watch it, but I didn't know that I was watching probably the best event they ever had. But after 92, ESPN started cramming in, more programming into their schedule, and this felt kind of more gimmicky eventually because other things were cropping up, like Rock and Jock Weekend. There were other things to do. Athletes became a little more protective of their image, and the teams that paid those salaries got a little more protective of their investments and didn't want them getting injured. So concern about injury became part of it. And another thing, and I totally believe this, but another thing that happened, and people will argue with me that care about this, but after the Jordan and Dominique and Spud Webb run through the 80s of the slam dunk contest in the NBA, like the big one, it kind of lost its appeal as well. All the marquee names had won it enough that they started pulling out of it and not participating. And so I distinctly remember dudes winning the contest that didn't even start for their teams. And when stuff like that happens, people lose interest quickly. And that's, in my opinion, that's what happened after the Jordan, Dominique, Spud Webb era of dunking in the NBA. There was a long stretch through there where the contest in the NBA kind of lost steam, and therefore this one did as well. So the novelty was kind of gone at this point. So it kind of faded out of must-see TV status by the mid-90s. So why do we care and why does it matter? Well, because it was a cultural moment, but it's when sports icons kind of passed over more into pop culture because, like I said, this was about selling sneakers ultimately. And it's when sneakers weren't just footwear. They were, an identity for players and kids. Keep that in mind. And when ESPN started pulling in A-list superstars into one contest and let them show off all their awesome athletic skills, we didn't normally get to see this, and it was for pure entertainment. Yeah, they were competing, but we were watching for pure entertainment, and that's why it was so Gen X, okay? So, yes, that's it. That's it for the Foot Locker Slamfest, and with a little focus on the 1992 version, which most people agree was the peak of its existence. All those A-listers and phenomenal athletes out there showing us what they could do on the basketball court, dunking a basketball. I was fascinated by it then. I'm fascinated by it now. And I hope you are too, or at least you learned a little bit more about it after hearing about it today. So I appreciate you spending the last 32 or 3 minutes with me. And as always, if you'll please give us a like, give us a subscribe, send us a comment, whatever you need to do. And still basketball season. So I'll be back in a week with more basketball content. This has been Sean Enos, your host, and I'll see you in a week.
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.